Good morning, folks. If you're just joining us, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give others maybe another 2 minutes or so to join us, and then we will start. Good morning again, folks. If you're just joining us, thank you for your time. We are going to give others maybe another minute or so to join us as well, and then we will start the morning school. All right, it is 8:01 in the morning. I think we are going to start. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for spending your morning with us. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the associate publisher and editor of the Arizona Capital Times, and you probably just heard my kid there yawn for a second. Um, uh, my apologies for that. It is 2020. We are going to talk about a great subject this morning, a subject that directly affects hundreds of thousands of Arizonans. But before that, I want to thank the Grand Canyon Institute for sponsoring today's morning school. The Grand Canyon Institute is a nonpartisan think tank that provides facts-based research and education to decision makers and the public on policies that affect economic, fiscal, and social future of our state. The principal objective of GCI is to elevate the fiscal and economic implications of policy initiatives and decisions for the benefit of policymakers, the media, and of course the general public. GCI's areas of research includes, among other things, economic recovery and shared prosperity, job creation and economic expansion, proper balance between state tax revenue derived from individuals and from businesses, K-12 education and higher education investments, and of course, unemployment insurance and unemployment benefits. I want to introduce you to Amy Pidoto, who is the executive director of Grand Canyon Institute. Amy has worked in communications and business development in the nonprofit sector, focused on raising awareness and support for public policy research and human service initiatives. She has a bachelor's degree or degrees in journalism and Spanish from Arizona State University and a master's degree in international policy and management from the University of California in San Diego. Amy, thank you for joining us. Go ahead, ma'am.
Thanks so much, Luigi. It's great to be here. As Luigi mentioned, the Grand Canyon Institute is a nonpartisan think tank. We're focused on evidence-based, data-driven research on the economic impact of public policy. GCI's research team under the direction of Dr. Dave Wells has helped shape the conversation around the issue of unemployment in Arizona. Last December, we published a policy paper on our out-of-date unemployment insurance system and that it would need to be reformed before the next recession. But that recession came a little bit earlier than we expected. Since March, we have been tracking the crisis brought on by the pandemic. Currently, 200,000 people in Arizona are experiencing unemployment, and they receive no more than $240 a week in assistance. Importantly, GCI's research also estimates that as of October, 64,000 people, up to 64,000 people, have had their hours cut by up to or by almost half, yet they receive no assistance at all because of the state's low maximum weekly benefit amount and our extremely harsh, lowest in the nation, $30 earnings allowance. In the absence of an overall, a complete overhaul of the state's unemployment insurance program, which we completely welcome the conversation on, GCI recommends that the state's $30 earnings allowance be increased to up to $160 per week in the next legislative session. This would cost the state less than $5 million per week, while providing up to 64,000 underemployed Arizonans with an estimated $300 million in state and federal assistance if Congress passes the $300 a week unemployment supplement that they're currently talking about, and that will hopefully pass soon. Importantly, very importantly, this would incentivize work while providing assistance to those who desperately need it. In most other states, people in similar circumstances will be receiving this federally funded assistance. Why would Arizona leave that money on the table when they so desperately need it? We're happy to talk about our research findings and recommendations with those on both sides of the aisle and with other stakeholders as well. We'd welcome the conversation. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Amy. Appreciate that. We have a great panel this morning. Joining us is Representative Regina Cobb, who is the chairwoman of the House Appropriations Committee. She represents LD5. Representative Cobb is a longtime resident of Kingman, Arizona, having served her community in the last 2 decades. After graduating from dental school in 1993, she moved to Kingman, where she also raised 2 daughters and operated 2 dental practices. She previously served as president of the Kingman Chamber of Commerce. Representative Cobb earned her Doctor of Dental Surgery degree from Case Western Reserve University in 1993. Representative Cobb, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Luigi. I'm so excited to work with this panel. That looks like you have a great panel here this morning, and it sounds like we're going to get a good discussion going.
Yeah, you know what I forgot to ask you, if you still have your dental practices?
I don't. I retired about 1.5 years ago. As appropriations chair, it was taking up too much of my time. Decided to retire and do politics.
Thank you. Also joining us is Representative Mitzi Epstein, who is a member of several House committees, notably the Commerce and Ways and Means committees. By profession, she is a computer system analyst with experience working in large international businesses and running her own small business. In the Treasury Department at Citicorp, she worked in lending and finance, and at Olin Corporation, she worked in manufacturing. She was first elected to the Arizona legislature in 2016 to represent Legislative District 18. She also previously served on the Kyrene School Board. Ma'am, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Luigi, and all. This is such an important topic.
Also joining us this morning is George Wentworth, who is the senior counsel with the National Employment Law Project, or NEL, where he has worked since 2009. The group advocates for policies to create good jobs, expand access to work, and strengthen protections and support for low-wage workers and the unemployed. George provides legal research, policy analysis, and legislative advocacy in the area of unemployment insurance. He has testified before numerous state legislatures, and before joining NELP, he worked at the Connecticut Department of Labor for 35 years, where he also spent 20 years as the agency's chief legal counsel and 12 years as managing unemployment insurance and employment and training programs. And George, just before we started, you told me that you actually tried to retire 4 times and it failed each time.
Yeah, it's nice. They call me the Groundhog Day of retirement. Glad to be part of this conversation.
Thank you for joining us. And finally, we have Dave Wells, who is the research director of Grand Canyon Institute. Dave holds a doctorate in political economy and public policy. He He has made recommendations in December of last year, as Amy noted, for urgent reforms needed for Arizona's unemployment compensation in advance of the next recession. During the pandemic, he has led GCI's efforts to monitor how failures to reform Arizona's unemployment system have harmed the state's economic recovery, put forward options for reform, and he has been sought out as an expert regarding how the various unemployment programs and their financing work. Dave, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And I take some responsibility for George's unretirement this year.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
I talked to him about he gives me feedback if I have questions. So he's good.
I think I'm going to start with sort of an update from the state legislature. Representative Cobb and Representative Epstein, what is, last time we had legislative leaders on our morning scoop, they told us that they're still trying to figure out what the opening day of session is going to look like. Have they figured out what the opening day of session looks like?
I'll probably go first. Representative Epstein, is that okay? Okay. I don't think we have. We're still working through. We have, we've had an increase in cases over the last month. I think that changes things tremendously. Still want to be, safe, but want to be able to have opening day and, have it an eventful opening day for especially the new legislators. We have been working on protocol for how session would look, and pretty much have that designed and almost completed. So
once you figure out, don't forget to let us know at the Arizona Capital Times, so then we can write about it. Representative Epstein, ma'am, what are you hearing from your leaders, but also from leaders across the political aisle?
Well, I think that it's a thanks for your report, Representative Cobb. I appreciate hearing that. And I know that our leadership team has been working with the Republican leadership team, and our team has been meeting with us regularly to hear everybody's concerns. Our Representative Sierra did a great service to all of us, I think, by sharing his COVID journey in the hospital and on a ventilator and so on. And there have been others since. And I think that we just want to make sure we take this very, very seriously. And I know that our leadership does. So I know that whatever we end up doing, it will be safe. And my great concern is that we make a way for everybody in the public to really participate as well as we possibly can. And in many regards, I think that opportunities like Zoom and so on could be terrific to allow testimony from across the state. Just sign up on a schedule and testify in a committee via Zoom. I think this is a new, wonderful opportunity, and we should take advantage of it to include more Arizonans as we develop new laws.
Thank you for those updates. Let me go to Dave. Dave, let's spend just a few minutes on the basics. What is Arizona's unemployment insurance and benefits system look like? How does it work? What kind of fiscal relief is offered at the state level and at the federal level, and how long do those benefits last?
Well, like most states, Arizona offers 26 weeks of state paid benefits. And then with the CARES Act, we have what's called Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation, PEUC, which adds another 13 weeks. The new congressional bill may make that a bit longer. And then if you meet triggers, which we currently meet, then you can get an additional 13 weeks. Some states have been able to have higher triggers that get you an extra 7. And separately, the CARES Act provided pandemic unemployment assistance, which is completely federally funded, but based off the state's actual UI or unemployment insurance system. And that, again, expires at the end of this year, but will likely be extended by Congress in the COVID relief package. So that's that part of it. The other part, though, is that our benefits are pretty atrocious. We have not changed the maximum benefits in the state since 2004, when Carolyn Allen helped lead that effort in the legislature. And at that time, we went from the second lowest to the third lowest benefit benefits. So we were still pretty bad. Today, our benefits are only higher than Mississippi, but our cost of living is way higher than Mississippi. And we have the highest threshold to access benefits in the whole country by a large margin. So the lack of a federal supplement recently has been really devastating for so many American families, Arizonan families, because they can only get up to $240 a week maximum, which is about $960 a month, which in most cases won't even pay the rent. So it's a very challenging thing, because when you're unemployed, it's a very it really nags at your psyche, because it's so much of your time, and your self-worth is tied to what you do. And when you can't do that, and you're in such levels of anxiety and stress, especially with COVID, when you're stuck in your house with your own family sometimes, and you can't even get around as much as you'd like to, it's a very bad combination, and it's really important that we support those families as best we can.
Thank you, Dave. Let me go to George. George, I know that the last article that I read about the federal stimulus package, Congress is very near a deal. What are the sort of the broad parameters of that stimulus package, and specifically when it comes to relief to millions of Americans who are out of work? What are we looking at exactly?
Sure. There's roughly right now, there's about 20 million Americans who are receiving some form of unemployment assistance, but about 14 million of them are receiving federal benefits under two major programs: the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program, PUA, which is about 9 million, and another 5 million are collecting under a federal extension known as PEUC. Those programs are scheduled to expire the day after Christmas. The stimulus package that is being negotiated now, which is still not finalized, would reauthorize those two major programs. Now, that's a big deal for Arizona. Right now, there's about 350,000 Arizonans who are collecting some form of unemployment assistance, but only about 80,000 are getting regular state benefits. These additional federal programs are basically kind of filling the gap for some inadequacies in the Arizona program. So it's really important that they be reauthorized for as long as this public health emergency goes along. The other point I'd just raise is there was a program known as Pandemic Unemployment Compensation, which was an additional $600 that the CARES Act added to every form of unemployment benefit. That expired amidst great political controversy at the end of July. And the stimulus package, at least as reported this morning, would bring that back for some period of time, but at a lower level, an additional $300. And right now, I believe some of the remaining details that are being worked out include exactly how much longer these programs would be reauthorized for. There's some thinking that this is, as President-elect Biden has called it, a down payment that, on stimulus relief or pandemic relief, and that Congress will have to come back and look at this again early in the next session.
Thank you for that update, George and Dave. As you know, the pandemic magnified Arizona's unemployment benefits challenges, chief of which is, we have a pre-COVID-19 application system that immediately got overwhelmed a couple months ago with, the huge influx of applications. Representative Cobb, I'm wondering if you've heard anything from DES, and I guess more importantly, what are the conversations surrounding, making that system more efficient? As I noted, it's a pre-COVID-19 system. And I guess the other question, of course, is what is the legislature potentially looking at in terms of helping sort of declog that backlog?
Again, thank you for that question. Right now, yeah, I have had many conversations with DES as far as what we were going to do as far as trying to remove the backlog. Most of their systems, most of what we do on a regular basis is on a mainstay computer. They launched another program about a month ago, which is a cloud program, and that is taking care of most of the pandemic increase that we've had. The mainstay is very stable. It's one of those, it's an older system, and it did get backlogged quite heavily during the big part of it, especially during July. But now they're catching up with that. They've also done a lot of private partnerships. Um, you know, we've did third party partnerships with Maximus, Bank of America. We've actually done call centers. So a lot of those have been helping with the pandemic claims. One of the things that we have seen with the new system, though, is there's a lot of fraud within it. And so we had to actually partner with an online, it's called On Point, I think is the fraud, one of the fraud um, uh, partners, and is helping us work through a lot of that. At one point, they were getting enough claims over what we had as a population that could actually be claiming it. And so they knew how much fraud they were getting. So that you can see that there's a lot of things that we need to work out and bugs that we need to work out. Hopefully we never have this again, where we have this many people coming into the system. But one thing with any kind of crisis, you look where you're deficient at and you start working towards getting something more efficient in it.
Thank you. Go ahead, ma'am.
To follow up on that, I would like to say that today, the JLAC, the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, will meet. And this is a committee that meets regularly to decide which entities should be audited by the Office of the Auditor General. And I will be proposing that we do an audit of the unemployment insurance program in that meeting. And it's on the agenda. We expect, if all goes well, I have been advocating for, let's get to work on this right now. And if all goes well, the Office of the Auditor General could possibly start to work in December on a performance audit of the unemployment insurance system. I've asked for two things. One is to look at the computer system and decide what should be done in business. This is what we do, a feasibility study to see what should the new system look like. And the second is to look at processing, because not only are our claimants suffering with horrible delays, our employers are actually getting billed wrongly, and we need to improve customer service for both. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think everybody at DES is working terribly hard and very smart and doing everything they can to solve problems as they come up. But we're facing, this is a mass unemployment event, and other states have plans for mass unemployment events. Arizona, not so much. So this is something that we need to attend to make sure that, because I agree, we all hope we do not face this again, but we probably will. That's the way economics and pandemics go. So we want to be much more prepared going forward.
Thank you for that. Dave, on your end, what are you hearing from the ground in terms of right now people's ability to actually apply in a more efficient way and get the benefits quicker? I know, for example, that one of DES's biggest problems is not necessarily people answering phone calls, but the adjudicators, the guys looking at the actual applications and making determinations.
DES has had again, they've been overwhelmed, but they've had a lot of challenges. So, and they've ranged from notices that are cryptic, that are very hard for people to understand. The unemployment insurance system is complicated, and people ought to have a clearer sense what their benefits are. So that needs to be cleared up. Some cases we've had vendors send out notices that were wrong, that I've corresponded, and we've gotten that. So we had like 19,000 people who got notices that were incorrect. The DES then corrected, but and then people do have, they talk to a different person every time they call when they finally get through, and they can often get different messages. And again, it's a complicated system because you have all these different programs, and they want to know how many weeks they got left. And again, they're trying to make their rent payments, their car payments, so they're really concerned about the details. So those have been all challenges that have been going on, and I think those are the kind of things we want to make sure that they have the resources, because we only had 13 people handling UI claims before the pandemic. And so we just want to be sure we have the resources so that we can handle these things, because recessions, they happen, And when they happen, they can happen fast. They don't happen frequently, fortunately, but we've got to be prepared for them. And we need systems that communicate well for people, because it's very frustrating and difficult for folks when they can't make sense of things.
Before I go to George, Representative Cobb, I want to ask you just a quick question, ma'am. You know, a lot of these issues can be resolved by funding. You know, you fund DS and they can hire more people, for example, or you fund their IT system and you can make it more efficient. To what extent do you think that conversation is going to happen? You know, in the next session, how much focus do you think will be spent on? And I guess the question is, really, is DS going to get more funding from the state legislature to, at the very least, hire more people, hire more adjudicators, for example?
Well, I just want to say one of the things that DES has done through the pandemic is hired 1,500 new employees, and a lot of the systems they go through and they've trained them. It takes weeks sometimes to train them, but they're allowing their employees also to be working from a home, and so that makes it easier. They've never, they have for the last 10 years they haven't been in person, so that wasn't a new standard to work through. We are looking at what types of fundings they're going to need, what we need to beef up that system. So those conversations are happening. There's also conversations happening in replenishing. How much is it going to cost to replenish the unemployment insurance benefit system to where it doesn't become a burdensome thing for the small business person when their rates start going up. And so that is another issue. So, and I know that one of the questions you asked earlier is what kind of legislative things we could do. Well, that rate is going to be set here in a couple of weeks, and it's going to be set a lot higher because it's off of July 31st. What the numbers were on July 31st. So that rate's going to be set up higher. We can, as a legislature, adjust that rate down, and we can do that by putting more money into that. The CARES Act dollars could be put into there. We are going to be having a surplus this next year. I think this is probably the number one area we need to put dollars into is to replenishing that unemployment insurance.
George, how much of an outlier is Arizona in terms of our unemployment insurance and benefit system? And more specifically, I guess, you know, we talked about the UI trust fund. Where are we at in terms of, you know, how healthy or how not healthy our trust fund is at this point when compared to the other states? But I guess broadly speaking, if you look at Arizona and then you look at other states, where are we at?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about trust fund solvency, the Department of Labor has a measure that says a state's trust fund is healthy if it can fund 1 year of benefits at the highest recession level. And they'll usually look back 20 and determine how much was paid out, say in 2009 or 2010. Does Arizona have that much on hand? Going into this recession, it had a little less than that. It did not meet the federal solvency standard. It was somewhere in the bottom third. But you know, research done since the last recession, Arizona's in this category of what we call low road states. That meaning that you had to borrow from the federal government during the last recession, but you paid it back very quickly. The reason you were able to do that is that your benefits are amongst the lowest in the country. As Dave said, the $240 maximum benefit is the second lowest in the country. Your average benefits a few dollars less than that. So the average Arizonan who loses their job gets about $234. The average wage in Arizona is about $1,000. So that means that the average unemployment check is replacing about 23% of the workers' pre-layoff earnings. All the reputable studies have said a good unemployment insurance program is going to replace something close to 50%. Nationally, unemployment insurance replaces about 45% of wages lost. So this is one of the reasons that in this recession, most unemployed Arizonans are getting federal benefits instead of state because the state program, it's hard to qualify for. You have to have, you have the highest earnings requirement in the country, and as I say, amongst the lowest benefits. So I would expect that Arizona will, as the federal law works, will at some point, if the recession persists, we'll probably have to borrow, but we'll probably be able to pay it back without there being any consequences. It's only if you borrowed for what amounts to 2 years without paying it back that employers face any federal tax consequences. Last point I just want to add in this discussion about administration, and a lot of people don't know this, but the state unemployment insurance programs, while the benefits are paid for with employer taxes, the administration of the program, that is all of the salaries and the technology that support the unemployment insurance program, they are federally funded. So there was a big block of federal money that went out to the states, but this was unlike any prior recession. There were no storm clouds looming for months and months, as is typical with a normal recession. And basically, you went from in Arizona having about 18,000 people collecting benefits at the beginning of March to having 500,000 people filing by the end of April. So any level of additional funding preparation, Arizona, like every other state, was overwhelmed kind of by the ferocity and scope of the unemployment that came with this pandemic.
Thank you, George.
On the trust fund thing.
Just real quickly, sir. Yeah, go ahead.
So first of all, the trust fund actually is in a lot healthier state than a lot of people think. We currently have $90 million in the trust fund. It went down by 7 million, but so employer taxes are really small. They're about $150 per worker per year. So they're pretty a small tax. But I anticipate the trust fund may not go into deficit until February or March. Because a lot of the revenues that come into the trust fund actually happen in April and May. So when that happens, it'll actually go into surplus. And we're going to somewhere finish next year. My projections are either with a surplus of about $60 to $70 million or a deficit of about $60 million. It all depends on what the economy does. But it's not as dire as I think a lot of folks think it could be.
Thank you for that, Dave. I want to go to Representative Epstein. Ma'am, insofar as what you're looking at in legislation next year, and I guess more specifically when it comes to how to replenish the unemployment insurance trust fund, what are you thinking of pushing for?
Well, although our trust fund is not going to go broke anytime terribly soon, it's going to get precariously low. And so no matter how you slice it, it's about $1 billion short of where it ought to be. As Mr. Wentworth described, we want to have enough in that trust fund to cover a year's worth of recession if need be. And we are almost down to zero, pretty close, with 90 million or so left in the trust fund, and it should be a little over $1 billion. So we have this rather large hole in the budget that we do need to make up for. Now, we don't need to make up for it right away this year. We want to put a nice steady plan in place to get it back to being solvent again. But nonetheless, it's a large amount of money and we do need to take care of it. So I've done a couple of things. One was appeal to Congress. So we wrote a letter to Congress or Arizona congressional delegation asking for federal aid to replenish our unemployment insurance trust fund. We really just reiterated what Governor Ducey had requested in July, because our congressional members should know how the state of Arizona is doing. And, at the time of the letter, we were down to $92 million in the trust fund. Remember, out of 1.2, it would be about solvent. And so we had requested aid. We also requested to be able to negotiate for better terms because our trust fund had fallen below that one on the standing. Our interest rates would be a little higher than if we had kept it fully solvent. So in this letter to Congress that was signed by most of the Democratic caucus, we simply asked for some federal aid. And I think that rooting for that. We could sure use that help rather than having to tax, especially as Rep. Cobb mentioned, our small businesses. As it is now, I feel that unemployment insurance tax is a bit harsh on our smallest businesses because it just goes for that first $7,000 of wages. So we want to look out for our small businesses is the point as we replenish that unemployment insurance trust fund.
Representative Cobb, I want to ask you specifically about the idea of maybe raising the unemployment insurance tax. As you noted, there are many businesses that are closed. That idea has been suggested for God knows how long now. But there is that potential route that you can take. How realistic is it to actually do that in the middle of the pandemic, and how receptive do you think the state legislature will be next year?
You just nailed it, Luigi. The state legislature is not going to be receptive at all on that. So I'm thinking right now, Governor Ducey still has $340 million sitting in the CARES Act funds that he has that need to be encumbered by the end of the year this year. Easily, we could put those back into the unemployment insurance. That's what I was talking about resetting. July, we were about 300 million in the negative of what we had $1 billion, so we were a little bit less than 700 million in the fund at that time. So if you put 300 million, that would stabilize that we would be able to reset that rate again in January. If the legislature comes in and says, this is a priority and we want to make sure that we try to get that fund back up close to where it was before or at that level, I think we can do that. Again, we are going to have a surplus this year, and this should be our one of our top priorities is getting that back up there. We do not want to put an extra tax on our small business people. They have already gone through all kinds of things through this pandemic, closures and reopening and restructuring their businesses. I can't tell you how many businesses that I've gone into and have tried to assist in one way or another. And this would just be another burden on them. And I don't think we need to add any more burdens. We have had a lot of things happen throughout this year. And I think that what we need to do is try to give them relief.
George, I want to go to you, sir. The idea of perhaps increasing the unemployment insurance tax. What is the conversation nationally? On this issue? I guess the question is this being talked about in other states? I do wonder.
Oh, it certainly is. As Representative Cobb alluded to, there are some states that have reached into their CARES Act funding and appropriated those dollars over to their unemployment trust funds. So there is some of that going on. I think nationally, I think in the last recession, we had about 35 states that went insolvent. It's reasonable to think that we will probably have something, maybe not quite that number, but a majority of states that will have to borrow from the federal government. And so where the political pressure point there, as I mentioned earlier, is when if the state is unable to repay the loans within 2 years, you start to see employer federal unemployment taxes increase incrementally each year. So I think there is discussion. We're still sort of in the eye of the storm at the moment, but once we were able to put it a little bit in the rear view, and the vaccine becomes more widely available, and the economy kind of moderates some. But I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind that there's been, some really fundamental changes that are going to persist beyond the end of this public health emergency, just in terms of consumer habits and so on, and that we will still be facing some level of recession in many states for some time to come. Long way of getting to the answer is that I do think Congress will at some point grapple with the idea of trying to repay the states for the extraordinary unemployment trust fund expenditures that they had to make. Now, having said that, I will say Arizona is a state that relied much more on federal dollars than state dollars because its state program is so hard to qualify for. But I do think that there a national solution around the large amount of insolvency is definitely something that'll be on the table in the next Congress.
Dave, the GCI has a couple of recommendations for legislation next year. Among other things, perhaps increasing the benefit cap to $490 a week, increasing the earnings allowance to a fourth of the weekly benefit amount, which is, as I understand it, which is where the rest of the states are. Decreasing eligibility thresholds to expand access to capture or expand access to more Arizonans. The idea of $490 per week, I can see some in the legislature pushing back philosophically by arguing, for example, that if you give people more in unemployment benefits, that potentially disincentivizes them to go look for work. What are your thoughts on that, sir?
There's no evidence for that. There's been studies this year. We looked back, and when I did my report last December, I take Texas, for example. Texas has a similar high cap. The average weekly benefit in Texas in 2018 was $400 a week compared to $230 in Arizona. The average time a person was on unemployment insurance in Texas was just short of 16 weeks. In Texas, it was just short of 16 weeks in Arizona. When people are unemployed, they want to get another job or they want to go back to work. The unemployment insurance system does not provide enough money for them to just sort of not want to look for anything. So there's simply no evidence, and there hasn't been any evidence during the pandemic either that this has caused people not to want to work.
Representative Epstein,